Hello. Hello, everyone that's joined us. I'm Demi. I hope that you're all well as can be, especially in this time of uncertainty that is COVID-19. I think I said my name. My name's Demi. I want to welcome you not only to the Settee, but also into the front room, which is the beginnings of an ambitious long-term neighbourhood platform in Birmingham to be designed, grown and co-owned by local communities. Currently, we're online, but our physical dreams of having this space will creep back into fruition when it's safe to take that work on again. I want to give you some insight into what On the Settee is. In the front room, the Settee offers a place of sanctuary, a place where you can take a load off. On our Settee, you'll discover conversations that will slot into your day, like a catch up with an old friend, your favourite song, something that makes you feel at home, open yet vulnerable and connected with yourself and others. I'm Demi Nandra. I am not part of the front room team. I was asked to host this lovely talk with David Derbyshire. I was part of a few weeks back on the Settee, and I got to be in David's position, and I was asked loads of lovely questions. Just to let people know that are watching, if you can ask questions on the Q&A, so on the chat, so please feel free to drop your questions in, and you can do it via the live stream if you're watching on YouTube, and we'll get to them at a certain point and we'll keep an eye on them. So today I'll be talking with David. Hi, David. And so David is quite an intimidating person because their bio is amazing. So I'm going to read out some of David's bio. So David Derbyshire, MA in spirituality, BSc in psychology, diploma in life coaching, founder and personal development coach. David graduated from the University of Reading with a degree in psychology and has spent over 20 years teaching psychology in colleges. In 2014, David received a very late diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. Realising that he had overcome so many barriers in his life, he has now dedicated himself to help other adults on the autistic spectrum. He received a distinction in his diploma, in life coaching. David used the skills he learned to work as a personal development coach and founded Asperger's Heroes, which we're going to link the website right now, Asperger's Heroes, as a community interest company. Recently, he has also been studying for a master's in spirituality, accredited by York St. John University. So a fully successful person that has just got all the letters after their name. We're going to put the website and also Asperger Heroes, the Facebook and the Twitter, and also the blog. How are you, David? So you're still muted, so if you just unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Hello.
Doing well, yes.
How are you?
Yes, doing very well.
Good. Do you want to add anything else to that lovely bio? Is there anything else in particular that you just want to tell participants that are viewing this that they might want to be aware of?
I think it'll all come out as we're talking.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, cool.
I think that's a very good summary. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. I always find like writing bios really hard because like every time someone asks me to send a bio, I'm like, oh, where is one? And it's like, but I write them all the time, and I'm like, oh, I need to do it. And you're like, I'm constantly being like, oh no, that sounds. Oh no, I need. Yeah. So, to the people that are viewing this, just to let you know, for full disclosure, I identify as a neurodivergent person. I sometimes stutter, pause. I love that I pause when I'm explaining that I pause. Takes me a few minutes to kind of gather thoughts and speaking. So there might be a few pauses with that. So please bear with us. It's not the Zoom glitching. It's just me kind of glitching. I think that's all I want to say about that. actually, in terms of like, you know, me saying I'm neurodivergent, there also might be people that are watching this, because it's also quite new concepts to me, like in the last few years. So actually, that we could have a discussion quickly, David, about terms and definitions, I suppose, about neurodivergent, autism, Asperger's, and anything else you think that's important to this conversation and those definitions.
Yes, I think that the idea diversity is just something we've become a lot more aware of, that we're all different, and that's great, and that's something to be celebrated, and is not a problem, and shouldn't be a problem. Sometimes it is with prejudices and biases in that way. But neurodiversity is just an awareness that our brains work in slightly different ways. Neurology, you know, everyone's brain works in slightly different ways, and everyone has their own unique personality. There are some patterns though, and we've come to say some people will be identified as neurotypical. That's how most people think, but not everybody brain works like that. Some people are neurodivergent, and there's certain patterns that those form into. It's not just a random difference, but there's what we formed a little pockets of understanding of what those are. And at the moment, the whole controversy about it, but they're defined by psychiatrists producing a diagnosis. So, or someone will go through an assessment and get something that says they are. It could be, some of them you might have heard of, things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's, autism, as we talked about, and Asperger's. So the autism spectrum is just one of these divergences, one of these differences. And it's just that our brains work, as we said, our brains work in slightly different ways. There's some things we can do really well, and some things we struggle with. It's just different people have different strengths and weaknesses. So in that neurodiversity, there's some wonderful strengths that we've got to be aware of. Someone that's dyslexic might be more creative. Someone that's dyspraxic might be a good strategic thinker. If someone gets a diagnosis of ADD, they might be have a lot more energy. They might, if they're Tourette's, they might be able to process things more quickly. So all things like that are differences. And with autism, there's quite a few differences, such as being able to focus and to think independently, and to have that special interest in one particular thing, and be able to really persevere in that. So yeah, those differences and all these differences are great, and to be celebrated, really. But not to the extent, I don't think, some will go further and say, oh, some of these are, you know, almost a superiority, and almost like with the next stage in evolution. I think that's for me personally, I think that's going a little bit too far, but we're all different, and I think that, and it's celebrating that diversity.
That is like explained so amazingly, you know, when you said, because I'm dyslexic, and I'm currently exploring if I might have ADHD, because and what I find is that how it can present for certain people with ADHD, you can have hyperfocus, as in like you can take one task and just go to town with it. And that to me is a strength. You know, I can go, right, if I can zone in, then it's cool. So yes, but we'll come more back onto kind of like how then a diagnosis can occur, and the issues around that, actually, because there is a lot around that. I would love to just kind of start with you and kind of your journey, because in your bio it says that you had a late diagnosis of coming to this journey, and it's just be really interesting to hear like when you were diagnosed and actually how did that happen, and I suppose like yeah, how it happened, and then also how did it change kind of maybe your relationships around you, or how you then perceived yourself and then your interactions. So that'd be really lovely to hear about your kind of journey, your personal journey.
Yeah, I think generally as people grow older, hopefully they begin to be more aware of their strengths and weaknesses,
Mm-hmm.
what they're good at and what they're not so good at. And I think over the years, probably in the last decade, I was beginning to become aware of some of those, and thinking I was that I had some autistic tendencies. My wife was great in that, in helping me in point those out. She'd worked with autistic people and began to be more and more aware of those. And I did, and there are tests online that you can Google and find, like the AQ, or autistic quotient test. And as I was doing those, I was thinking, it looks like it's not perhaps just a tendency. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
this is something more than that. That this is me. And got to a point where I was really thinking that, and really thought, I just got to a point where I had to know, and having a professional make a judgment is one way into this community as such. There's a whole debate whether that should be or not, but one way of doing that is to have a professional make that judgment. So, and the way that you do that is go to your GP, you get a referral to a psychiatrist, even though it's not a mental illness. Go to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist does the steps in assessment, and they make a judgment. And I went through all that process in 2014, sitting there wondering, what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? But I had a wonderful conversation with a psychiatrist, and they were asking questions about my childhood. And
Could I quickly ask how long it took with the GP and the referral?
It was several months. I've known people that have waited 2 years.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
It was something like several months, I think,
Mm-hmm.
that you had to wait, because they had to get funding. They couldn't just go, there you go. They had
Right.
to make an application for funding before
Yeah.
they could make a referral.
So the application funding was just to fund your assessment?
Yes. Yes.
Ah.
So it's not, I don't know if that always happens, I think, but sometimes I think it depends on your area. But that to do this, so you had to wait.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got an appointment and went in there. And
What was that? Sorry, can I ask what was that period between waiting for the referral and actually going to the psychiatrist? What did that feel like for you? Was it just like, because the reason why I asked that is because when I was trying, I think it was 2014 as well, I was battling with depression. I didn't know at the time, and I was trying to figure out what was going on. And then I was signed over to cognitive therapy, but was on a waiting list. And that kind of time between finally summoning kind of the courage to go to a GP and say, look, and this is different, but look, I just feel like something's different and I need to try and figure out what this is.
yeah.
And actually the kind of like, and I kind of need like actual, it can't just all feel to me. So I need kind of concrete answers. And then that kind of wish-washy, okay, well, we'll send you here, but then you'll receive a letter and blah, blah, blah. And you're just like, so actually I was wondering what that was like for you as well, because to the decision to even go to the GP and go, because it's also this idea, like we'll get to it about like biases and stuff like that. But I have many friends, and myself included, where it's been like, you can be very much questioned in what you think about yourself and about yourself. And then when to be questioned and kind of denied and policed around that, then it can make you even go, oh God, I shouldn't have bothered. So I wonder what your kind of experience was in that period between the GP and the referral.
I think I remember being a bit nervous. I remember but I'd worked through, and I'd gone to the GP with a long list of why I thought this, and I still thought that. And so I was fairly convinced. that I should get that diagnosis, but
Mhm.
part of it is sort of, I might be quite shocked and not. And then when the psychiatrist said, "Oh yeah, it's a clear diagnosis," it sort of
There's no grey areas yet.
no,
Yeah, good.
no. That sort of knocked me down a bit. I was thinking, well, perhaps I thought maybe they should have been, but I had been quite convinced, I think, from looking at the criteria
Because
and
you were
what I'd
self,
written,
yeah.
what I'd written. Yeah, yeah. So
And
yeah,
sorry, can I just,
I still remember being a bit nervous. Yeah.
yeah, can I just ask, because people might be watching and they might be thinking, oh, actually, like, I read a few things on Google and actually maybe I'm on the spectrum. Did it help then for your wife, because like you said, she's worked with people that have autism, or did she help kind of with that, the writing for those, those kind of criteria, like that list, did she, um, was that a helpful thing to be like, do you want to look at this? Or was it, was that a thing, or was it fully like, you did it and you went straight there and da da da? Or was it more of a support network?
Can you answer that in the comments, because I can't really remember. She's there. She's there.
Oh, okay. Well, I was like, who? You want me? What? Your
I
wife's in the
don't know.
comments. Right. What's
Yeah.
your wife's name?
Nets.
Hello, Nets, if you're here. Yeah, just, write it down,
In the comments later.
Oh,
I
okay.
remember liking that. I remember going to the GP. I think we did go together to the GP. So she probably looked at that
That's, yeah.
beforehand, probably for my grammar. I don't know. And whether she agreed with those. But yeah, I mean, she'd been very helpful in identifying it, making me think that in the time before. We'd worked through something in a couple's handbook that was for someone that was on the autistic spectrum, that was in a relationship with someone that was neurotypical.
Mhm.
We've been working through that together even before I had a diagnosis.
Right, okay.
And that was really helpful
Yeah.
in that. Yeah.
So did then your kind of, did you then start, when you got the diagnosis and it was very much clear, do you then reflect back on the time before the diagnosis with like a kind of new vision and new perspective of actually like all your experiences and interactions and actually what you did with a different kind of way of seeing, going, oh, okay, right.
Yeah. A simple way to illustrate it is, you might have watched one of those films that have a twist ending.
Yeah.
You watch a film and it's got and then there's a twist at the end, and something happens and you go, oh, he was the villain and he was the hero. It was the other way round.
Yeah.
And you have to go back and watch the whole film again
Yeah.
for it to make sense. And it felt a little bit like that. It
So
felt,
that,
oh, that makes sense of
Mhm.
when I was at school and that happened. That makes sense of when I was of why people laughed at me there and why people bullied me there. That makes sense why I was so good at that and why I could read things so quickly. That makes sense why I didn't. So there's things that I could do and things that I couldn't do. Why I found doing a mundane job really, really difficult, but I could really focus on studies. And so lots of things like that began to make sense. And I looked through the criteria and I could think of an exact, and each, and I read books about Asperger's and autism afterwards, and I was going, yes, I remember doing that. I remember that. Oh, that's what that's called when I experienced that, and realizing that experiences that I'd thought, oh, I had a real bad temper there, or I was really obnoxious there, wasn't I? And then thinking, actually, in that situation, I was having a meltdown because I was overloaded with all this stimulation, but I never appreciated that. But that's what was happening there. And suddenly reinterpreting everything, lots of things that were in my memories from all through my life, and in my relationship with Nets, in my in work, in in studies, in friendships. Yeah,
That's
just
so interesting because,
massive insight. Yeah.
so did it feel like that sense of clarity helped then? Because I suppose then if you look on, like, say, like you said, like certain bad experiences, did it help heal kind of some of that shame around maybe thinking, oh, you know, like you said, I was it was just, I was overloaded, you know, I wasn't just like being angry, you know, like, did it allow that kind of like, I don't know, kind of more of
Yes, things like forgiving.
towards a self-look, yeah, like a really, you
Yeah.
know, kind of like being more self-aware about yourself allows to then, this is my personal take on it, is that the more I learn about actually how my brain is set up and how I am, it allows me to let go of some of the shame that I was told when I was younger. I was told I was lazy, I was told, like, you know, certain things, and that's instilled in me, and I still to this day will say, oh, I'm just a lazy person, and then, you know, my therapist or someone will be like, did you hear what you just said? And I'm like, oh, sorry, you know, like. And when I was younger, I was taught, I got, my mum would call me the demon child, and that's really loaded thing to say to a child.
Yeah.
But again, I was very angry, and now I can look back at certain things and certain situations and be like, oh no, I was just, you know, there's certain things that were occurring with me, and I can say bye to that shame, or I can kind of like hold it and be like, you don't need to feel ashamed. Like, I can hold little Demi. So I suppose my question is a bit, by looking back at like little David, could you feel a sense of like a bit more like, no, you deserved a bit, you deserved more, you kind of deserved more kind of appreciation and space to feel out these things?
Yeah. Yeah. The big thing that comes to mind, I mean, we're all on a journey of self-awareness, and that was a massive step in self-awareness. And one thing that I talked about in that diagnostic setting was my mother, and my mother being probably autistic in the way that she reacted, and we told some stories about the way she reacted. And the psychiatrist said, yeah, she probably was. She died a few years before I had the diagnosis. Realizing I'd never had an easy relationship with my mother, but realizing she might have been autistic, and realizing she may have been doing all that she could and all that her brain enabled her to do, and thinking she's being very loving. There was a great, I mean, I think I've forgiven my mum a few times, but sometimes you go back and keep forgiving her and it doesn't really work. But in that process there of realizing, well, she probably was doing everything she could, but still came over very domineering, very wrong, because that's just how she was. And if I'd understood that I was autistic and she was autistic, it might have made the relationship completely different. So I think there was a strange healing, even after she'd gone, of that in me understanding about my autism.
Yeah. I'm so kind of like, I'm so happy for you that you kind of got kind of, yeah, that kind of like, I suppose I'm not going to say the word closure around that, but like, as in, you know, like there's again, awareness, like a level of like, oh, it wasn't just this and it was just this, but there's more. So yeah. Why, can I ask, so you run Asperger's Heroes, and that's a website. Could you tell us a bit more about the website and the services and why actually you started this? So it was only in 2014 you got diagnosed. That's what, 6 years? That's not even that long. And I looked at the website and I was like, oh shit, this is a full on, these are great services. There's a blog, there's groups, like there's coaching, you know, there's a full on like actively outwardly giving an act of service to others. So I wonder about that, and why and when and how did you start that?
I lectured in psychology for a number of years. I think I'd wanted some time to do something a little bit more practical, because it can be very theoretical. And you can teach someone about stress, but you don't actually reduce their stress. They just learn it for an exam. And and it's great getting you through that.
Sorry, that just remind me of like thinking about like how like I intellectualize my trauma and I never really feel it. Like I'm just, oh, I know why that and that. Like, so it helps to have awareness. But sorry, carry on. Yeah.
You get that. Yeah. So I started looking at coaching about the same time I was looking at my diagnosis, and I did a diploma in life coaching. And at the same time, there was opportunities to take voluntary redundancy from what I was doing. And it just all sort of came together that I could coach people that were also on the autistic spectrum, that were people going for a later diagnosis. And it just all sort of came together, and I started coaching one person, then another, and just using the skills I'd learned in the life coaching diploma, but also realizing that those on the autistic spectrum I could understand, I could have an empathy with, because like in ways that someone else couldn't. And so specializing in that made a lot of sense at this point. And I began to develop that, and now we've got a group that that we're running, that in neurodivergent adults that are either on the autistic spectrum or suspect they are and are looking for that. So I'm running that and doing workshops. I'm doing one-to-one coaching with
Mm-hmm.
individuals and different packages. Sometimes I do a pre-diagnostic package.
I saw that.
That's someone that suspects and exploring their neurodiversity, to say, perhaps I am on the autistic spectrum, and I've coached people through that, or helped people and supported people as they've gone through the process of getting a diagnosis. And other people have already had a diagnosis and just want to just want some help in understanding their life and where they want to go with it, and forming routines that are helping them do that. And so I've been doing that, and at the same time I was studying some more things on spirituality as well. Masters in spirituality that I was doing doing that part-time over the last over 3 years. I finished it a year ago, but I was doing that for 3 years while I was setting all this up.
Right. Yeah. I just want to pick up on what you said about, having someone to talk, or it being a more of a formal setting with coaching that is not neurotypical. Because it makes me think about what you said earlier about it's not, being on the spectrum is not a mental illness. So why would a psychiatrist then diagnose you? And actually makes me think also is like, I don't know the stats of this, and so I'm not going to say that I know, but I wonder how many psychiatrists are neurotypical, and that kind of also understanding of that. And so so maybe I just want to ask you about, like, because it was really interesting what I saw on the website. It said, you don't have to have a formal diagnosis to come look into our services. And it makes me think about, I've been very interested in the last few years about normalizing self-diagnosis of various neurodiversities, and what feels comfortable to you and to you only, and that kind of like agency and autonomy around having to say, this feels right to me. So kind of want to hear you a bit more about this, the criteria and the system, what you think it's in place for getting diagnosed with Asperger's and autism, and how you feel about that. How you
Some people like the term self-diagnosis. I think it's a self-identification. We can identify as someone, if someone suspects that they're on the autistic spectrum, they can identify as autistic. They can say, well, that's what it's not just a suspect, I've looked through all the criteria, I know all these criteria, so I'm going to identify as an Asperger, and I'm sure that, and there are many people that do that. So Asperger's syndrome, just to say, Asperger's syndrome is one condition on the autistic spectrum. The diagnostic criteria changes all the time. That's an interesting aspect as well, because you think if something is a diagnosis, it's like fixed and it's true. Not like that. It's a construct. People have written this and they change it. So as time's gone on, we had something called autism and something called Asperger's, and now we have autistic spectrum disorder, generally speaking, although some people still might get a diagnosis of Asperger's, but I think it'd be rarer more recently. But those things vary and change over time. And unless you're, technically it's a doctor who can diagnose. So unless you're a doctor, you can't really self-diagnose, technically speaking, but you can identify.
Makes me think about language, like, you know, like, yeah, like actually critiquing or just inquiring a bit more about the language that we use, and reclaiming, I suppose, and all these ideas of it, or reimagining language around it. Because when you said here, you know, it is a construct, it made me think about, like, well, who's doing the constructing, like who's making that criteria, and then who then changes the criteria as you go on. Because if you look at history, you know, criteria isn't just, like you said, it doesn't feel a neutral space. It feels loaded, and then that can intersect with gender, with race, with class, with disability. And I wonder how you feel about that. I suppose what I'm trying to ask is, I wonder, and this, you could be like, oh, how the hell am I supposed to know, Demi? But like, I wonder, I wonder how you see it going in terms of like criteria, or like, and the reason why I say this is because I was reading a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and they were talking about the what are they talking about, the mental illness, you know, the book that has all the supposedly illnesses in it, and etc., and then the different volumes. And I just felt myself get really angry at it, because it just felt really like you said, like it's a construct. And
I think there is, how put this, the way that it's going, I would like to see that there isn't, I would like to see diagnosis of something like neurodiversity to disappear. As ultimately, there is some, there are important values to that, which I'll say in a moment, but who made psychiatrists the gatekeepers of this community? If it's an illness, we can understand that, but it's not an illness, it's a difference. And I like the idea of saying, well, it's just that we're different in a certain way. Now,
because if you're different, why do you need to be diagnosed with, like, you know, if being neurotypical and being neurodiverse was on the same kind of, they were both held at the same kind of value and respect, then you wouldn't need to diagnose this thing over here. You'd just be like, here's the spectrum of people.
What's happened in our culture is our culture seems to be geared up to neurotypical ways of thinking. And because of that, neurodiverse people can be disadvantaged. And so it becomes helpful to think of neurodiverse people as having a disability, simply because in order to level out the playing field. If we can say, yes, we have a disability, so we need some support, level the playing field. Ultimately, the world should have been different to allow us. Ultimately, everyone should have been included to start with.
Yeah, yeah,
But we weren't included, so we need something. We need some extra support
yeah,
to include us.
yeah. The culture has disabled us.
Yes,
So yeah, exactly.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
then you
That's
have
why it's
to.
useful. So that's why it's useful. That's why it's vital to get a diagnosis
Mhm.
now.
Yeah,
To
in the
have that
current, yeah, in this
in the current,
current, yeah.
yeah. But what I'd like to see is somehow all of those differences to be celebrated, to be understood,
And not discriminated against. Yeah,
not discriminated
yeah,
against. Yeah,
yeah,
and so that so that everyone is able to be used to find fulfillment and to use their strengths to their full ability.
yeah, yeah.
Understand their strengths and their weaknesses. That's
Hmm.
really what we're aiming at.
Hmm.
To be
And
able to do that. Yeah.
speaking of strengths, when we were setting up for this meeting, we had a little chat about um, stereotypes and stereotypes in popular culture and framing the spectrum as overcoming something or
Yeah.
have, and I just saw this new kind of show, and I've only just seen the trailer, and it's about like love while on the spectrum. And God, I hope it's nothing like the trailer, because at the moment the trailer's just like, we've got to try and help them find love, but they have no social skills, and these people, and like it's really problematic. And I hope to watch it and hope to see some agency and autonomy and kind of like, and also these weird stereotypes be debunked. But you've talked to me, and it says on your website and all these things about the idea of like really reframing that positivity and those strengths. So I wonder if you could talk a bit more about maybe also your personal experience of kind of understanding your strength, but also what the strengths you feel are. And these, again, it's generalized and they can vary, but if we start talking about them actually as real, they are actual real positives, like they are the strengths that we
Yes.
want. Yeah, so I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, we can people do have stereotypes of autism, and people will say things like, "Oh, you don't look like autistic," because they think somehow this autistic person's going to really as you said, lack some social skills.
Mhm.
Though that may be true, that there is, there are some weaknesses in that, but somehow that idea that they because someone's autistic, their thinking will be impaired in some
Mhm.
way,
Mhm.
their communication will be impaired in some way.
Mhm.
Though there are weaknesses in those areas, there are also some great strengths. And going back to one of the things that we mentioned, I said I was studying a master's in spirituality.
Spirituality, yeah.
In a dissertation in that, I looked at some of the spirituality of autism. Now, in that, my spirituality comes from a Christian perspective, but some of the things I was looking at were much more broader than that, in terms of seeing spirituality in terms of being fulfilled, finding your life's purpose, in finding meaning, and enabling to make your contributions.
Mhm.
And in that, I was exploring some of the strengths of autism and how autism can be, uh, and how someone that's autistic could identify those strengths. And I've interviewed a few people and analysed those. So, two or three really stood out, or three really stood out in the dissertation that I did. And one was the ability to focus, the hyper focus. Now, in some ways, it can seem like an autistic person can't focus at all. It's
Mhm.
because of the difficulty in switching focus. And so once you're onto a topic, you're much more persevering, much more concentrating on that, and able to really sort of excel. Really, it might be reading something and understanding it much more quickly. It might be
Mhm.
following this topic. That's why we have these special interests in different topics. Generally, seems to be associated with the autistic spectrum, and that focus is a great strength. It means it's difficult to, we'll get frustrated if we have to keep being interrupted and have to keep change in focus, but once we're going and we're in the zone, we can achieve a lot. So there's strengths like that in employment. So a lot of people that are on the autistic spectrum might have jobs like computer programming, where they've got to look through in detail at something someone might get a little bit more bored with doing, and seeing that in there. So there's that focus, but there's I found a couple of interesting. The other two were quite interesting to find, was thinking independently and not being so affected by conformity. And social influence. There's an interesting thing about obedience, that we do like to follow rules, but we're very clear in who. I'm generalizing a little bit when I say we, but there's a choice of which rules we want to follow and how we want to follow them, and we're not forced by the power of conformity so much in general. So we can think more independently, and so we will be the person that says, when you say, does this suit me, we'll say no, it doesn't, where someone else is a lot more might be a bit more diplomatic,
a bit wish-washy about it, just
and
you ask for a question.
We'll say what we think, but it's because we think independently. We're very we're honest in our independence, and honest to ourselves, and we'll admit some things and say, but we do blurt them out. So that is, it can be a bit of a weakness in that we're not, in communicating them, and we can come over a little bit blunt and so on. Generally speaking, there are things that autistic people do tend to need to learn a little bit more. But the independent thinking is another really important strength.
Because I can imagine, because when I, again, back to your also your studies as well, it's the idea of going, like you said, lack of conforming. And again, this is generalizing, but for you, going, okay, right, I want to do this, and then I'm going to go, like you said, there's been a long time between when you did your undergrad and your MA. And just, it's that kind of I think we mentioned this before also, about how there's this weird stereotype that there's lack of people that are on the spectrum, lack of empathy or don't care. And I just don't understand that, because if you look at that in terms of like disability justice and looking at injustices, and you've said you've definitely said this to me, you were saying, well, if people on the spectrum and neurodivergent people are out working for disability justice, that's the biggest form of empathy and compassion there can be, because you're working to make sure everyone's included. And I just find that really fascinating, because when you said it, I was like, oh my God, yeah, how can you, I think what the issue is, that a lot of anecdotal shite that becomes the one single narrative. And I mentioned this before about this one show I was watching on Netflix, and it follows the boy that's on the spectrum, and he's high functioning, but he's trying to have sex and get with a girl, and everyone's trying to help him, and it's just, again, I've seen that narrative since I was little. I don't think I've ever seen a portrayal because I'm talking like this because I come from theatre, and that is my sort of that's why I work in the industry. And I suppose I don't think I've ever seen a dark-skinned black woman or femme person with autism on the telly. And it's always been usually boys, it's always usually men, they're usually white. And that kind of lack of popular culture diversity allows them to filter into what we then think is a person, like you said earlier, with, oh, you don't look autistic. If I went, or a friend of mine would go to them and said, oh, I think I'm autistic, and they don't look what they see on reference, those barriers, I suppose. So I suppose actually maybe a question on wider thoughts about disability justice and how, of course, I don't know what I think about this question, because I've put disability justice, disability theory, how can they be used to tackle ableism? I don't really know what I mean by that.
Yeah, well, just to back up a few things. You
Yeah,
make
okay, yeah.
very important comments there. I think there is a bias in the diagnostic criteria,
Hmm.
so that there are a lot of women that have come to me, more than men. Women have come to me more than men, shall we put it this way, that are getting late diagnoses. And there is a bias in that towards boys. I think there could well be bias, racial bias,
Oh yeah,
caste
definitely.
bias,
Yeah.
and so on. So so autism seems to be primarily, as you say, primarily toward boys, probably middle class white boys. And that's a bias in the diagnostic criteria that we're only beginning to redress.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of women are getting very late diagnoses. Some are getting late diagnosis. The average age for a boy, I don't know the actual figures, but it is a boy. It is
Yeah, yeah.
very young. It
Yeah.
is. Whereas average age for a girl is more like a teenager or later. And so there are those biases.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's
And then those biases don't enable, like you said, what we said earlier, if that you claim and calling it a disability, then allows you to kind of like level it out and be like, okay, I've got this, so you can't fire me because you think I'm being like this in my job. Actually, this is. But then those barriers in place where those certain people are not getting that kind of that confirmation that is needed in this current system to function and get a job, and then it gets worse and worse the more marginalized you are. I can imagine how
it's worth getting a diagnosis so that people understand you.
Mm-hmm.
And
but it's
so many misunderstandings. Oh, this person might be lazy, this person might be bad tempered, this person just can't do things. Whereas actually, if things are adjusted a little bit, they can actually do quite a lot.
Yeah. But I just imagine how many people have been, the more marginalized you are, and the more, like, I can't imagine how many people, especially from the Black community, that little black boys have been told you're just bad tempered, blah blah blah. And actually, if there's more of a self-awareness of this person could be neurodivergent, can we explore that a little bit more? Actually, then it wouldn't then have a knock-on effect on all the things that they can then access and realize about themselves. And that in its sense is like, and I'm not trying to mince my words, but that is a pandemic in itself, because it's this current, I think I was saying to you about like a triangle. It just feels like, not a triangle. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I am trying to say is that it's just a constant, like, people are just not being held, not being, I think the word I'm looking for is cared for. It's just straight back to stereotype racism, ableism, transphobia, homophobia, all these I think the intersections of oppression are just insane, and it's so insidious. And the most vulnerable, and what I mean by that is, I think vulnerable is also a loaded word when you talk about neurodivergent people or people on the spectrum, because it's like they're vulnerable because they are vulnerable, not actually they're vulnerable because the system makes them vulnerable. So
very interesting. We're having a very neurodivergent conversation in the way that we're doing it, because a lot of people have this very backwards and forwards. I say one little thing, you say another little thing. We're both doing little monologues, which is great, but it really it just illustrates how neurodiverse conversations can work, and can work well. Because I hope people were listening to a lot of things that you were saying there. They're absolutely brilliant things that you were bringing out there. And empathy. You mentioned empathy. I keep backing back to other things as well, and so it's not this sort of going. Some people feel a conversation ought to go clearly backwards and forwards, and I know where we are. But suddenly, I think empathy you talked about. I really want to say something about that.
Yeah.
Autistic people, one strength is empathy, and empathy partly we can have empathy with marginalized people because we've been marginalized. Those that have been excluded, we can have empathy with those that have been excluded because we have. But also there is something, a direct sort of empathy that autistic people can experience where we are feeling other people's emotions. We might not be able to read people as well. And so we might get, you know, tricked in that way, and all sorts of problems that can occur. We didn't understand what the person was getting at because he didn't say it directly. But there is an empathy where we can really, you know, pick up the emotions almost directly and feel them ourselves and go, wow, you know, wow, this person, you know, and I found that between Nets and myself that I can begin to feel, you know, I might begin to feel anxious about something and think, hold on a minute, it's not me feeling anxious, it's Nets feeling anxious. So what are you anxious about? Oh, it's this. That's why, because I'm picking up. It's like the emotions sort of leaking into me in in that way.
Is that called an empath?
It's someone who shows a lot of empathy. They refer to
yeah. But that's really interesting because I feel like all my friends that are neurodivergent are like that, you know, they'll be like, oh God, I feel quite drained because I'd taken on, I didn't realize I was taking on some, you know, and you're just like, oh my God, like, and I can feel that too. So that kind of weird stereotype of like no kind of empathy or connection, because what you said, you know, that kind of like deeper connection actually, feels like there's so much truth in that, you know, like so much truth in that.
Because one model of autism is this, is that we experience the world, you know, in fantastic colors, experience it a lot more because we have a lot of sensitivities, and so we can the colors are brighter, the sounds are higher volume. It's like everything's turned up, and so emotions are also turned up. And we've just got, well, what we've done is we've learned to block these because it's too much. And over the years we've blocked things because it's just too much. And sometimes we can't filter as normal, as neurotypical people can filter things. And so we've learned just to somehow force that block and ignore that. And so I think sometimes we've done that with, or I've done that, and I think other people on the autistic spectrum do that with emotions. And so they can appear very unemotional. They can appear to lack empathy because they're having to block it because it's so strong.
That you would, wow,
They would just be overwhelmed by those emotions, and they wouldn't be able to tell if they were their own or someone else's. So they've learned to put that barrier up, and as you slowly ease that barrier, and you're able to feel people's emotions, they're a lot deeper and a lot stronger than a lot of people.
That's a lot of people feel.
That's my experience. Experience of it. It's not just a theory. That's my experience.
Exactly. That's your experience. So it's not a theory.
So I think that empathy, and going back to what you're asking about, that whole idea of justice, that that's why we generally have a desire for things to be put right. We can see, one thing is, with the ability to focus, we can see the world and see what and see things, whether it's a computer program or see it in an organization, something that needs to change, something we want to question. Why have you done like that?
The question.
And we might not fully have all the answers, not claiming that at all, but we might just see things that need, that perhaps neurotypical people would find it harder to see. That's why the neurodivergent and the neurodiverse voice is important, and to see the situation and to ask those questions and to bring those points out. And so in the world where there's injustices, we see we have a heart to to see a system and to want it to be improved, to see
Mhm.
whether that's seeing a computer program, wanting it to solve the problems in it, whether it's seeing how an organization works and saying, it'd be better if we did it like this, or
Mhm.
something bigger in seeing how the world's working and thinking, we want to improve it, we want to make things better in some way. And I think that comes out of that empathy, in that we know in a much stronger way, we can imagine what it's like
Mhm.
for other people. And so we
Mhm.
want to see that different. And it's not for ourselves. Quite often we can be misunderstood that we're saying this. Oh, do you want? No, it's nothing to do with me. Well, why are you interested in that? Because this will make it better for everyone.
Mhm.
This will make it better for other people. It's not about me, it's about what I see that needs to change
Mhm.
in order to do that. And so we can have that desire for social justice. I mean, everyone can have that, but there's something, I think, that in neurodiversity there is a desire for that in a lot of neurodiverse people in different ways.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, because Jeanette here has just put, also have a persistence in keeping on asking the questions. And I actually think that's so
yes,
interesting, because it talks to me about something about, um, like you said, about, maybe hyper focus, or just this idea of like being persistent, and that kind of, which can have a negative, but kind of like keep going and going
yes,
and going, and that kind of, that crossover when, like, um,
yes. So
I
we
can't.
talk
I would honestly put a lot of my money on to say that many of activists are neurodivergent, because, like you said, that the strengths to kind of, I mean, to be an activist, you have to be hyper focused. You have to be persistent. You have to continue. You have to keep going. You have to ask questions. And I think what you said about questions is really interesting for me, because it's like you said, you don't have to know the answers, but for anything to be reimagined,
mm,
or yeah, something that we haven't thought about, you have to ask questions. So if no one's asking the questions, then we're just going to recycle the same shitty ways. What I'm going to do now, if anything else actually you want to add before, I'm going to just see if there's any questions from viewers. But if there's anything else you want to add.
oh, I had something then, but
It might come back to you.
I'll come back to it. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just seeing. Has anyone got any questions?
Yeah, if people got any questions, please write them in the Q&A box or in the chat. That would be
Yes,
great.
please. And while we're waiting, if there's any questions coming, I'd probably just add on the question. What's your kind of aspirations with Asperger's Heroes, and moving forward with it? Because at the moment, is it just you, or is there a team, or do you like there to be a team? I suppose I'm thinking about your kind of support system and how you continue.
Yeah, as it's a CIC, there are the directors.
So, sorry, can I just ask what a CI?
Community interest company.
Right, okay.
Yeah, because as it's a community interest company, which a lot of social enterprises are.
Right, okay.
Plus, we do have directors.
Okay.
So that is a good
Framework.
network in itself, and also keeps us on track with what we're doing. There's four of those. One of them's one. I'm one. My wife's one, and there's two other people. So that's helpful in itself. The moment we're doing this group, which are doing workshops, and that would be brilliant to continue. We've got about 10 people if they're all there, but maybe a few more that have come once or twice. That could grow. and that could grow over this year, and more people will be very welcome to, if they are neurodiverse or exploring their neurodiversity, to come to those. We're doing some really valuable workshops looking at different aspects and characteristics, all with this positive concept of strengths in there. So yeah, that's something I'm looking at. I'm coaching people that are on a one-to-one basis. I'm putting together a lot of these things, as you can see some of the things in the blog posts. I mean, ideally, you know, some of these things in the blog posts could form together and be a little free ebook at some point, and
that sounds great.
a book or a course, and the workshops we're doing could form into a course, and that's what we'd want to is one way of developing that. Yeah, so that's sort of the direction.
Yeah, and if people want to kind of get in touch, they can get in touch via your Facebook page, can they? Or and the website.
Well, so Facebook, search for Asperger's.
Yeah, it's on the chat list. Yeah, Asperger's Heroes.
And like the page, and can communicate. You can message me there. You'll see some of the things that we're posting.
Yeah.
The group, if you come to one of the Zoom groups, you can get into into a WhatsApp group and into a Facebook group where we're discussing some of the things that we're talking about in the Zooms, and people are sharing links and having some interesting discussions in that. Yeah, and if you look on the website, I've got a blog with some blog posts, little videos of me explaining one or two things. I'm doing a series on some of the strengths of autism.
Oh, that's great.
Blog posts, and so I'm doing a little video and a little blog post about those, and looking at some of these different ones that we've been talking about. And the whole sort of theme is that finding your meaning and purpose in life, and using some of these strengths, being authentic, being your true self, overcoming that sort of idea of masking and pretending to be neurotypical because it's exhausting. That's quite important.
We have a question. Do you have any advice for people who are trying to navigate sensory overloads, especially as we're so Zoom centered right now? That's a very good question, because yes,
ready. On Zoom, I think we've learned that you don't have to have your camera on. Eye contact's interesting. We were talking this morning, because I had the group this morning, and I was saying that, you know, I'm looking at you now. Am I looking at you? Are we making it? We're not quite making eye contact, and that's in fact quite good for us, but it's quite good for people on the autistic spectrum. In Zoom, we don't have to quite make that same sort of eye contact.
Yeah.
But you don't have to have your camera on.
Yeah.
And you can look away. You can be doing something else. You can be, you know, and so all of that can be not, because you can find that draining, and people on Zoom can find things draining. So all those are quite important little tips. But I think generally overload can be important, because you can end up having a meltdown. And so you learn, I've learned the connection between those two. I've learned that if I'm in somewhere that's crowded, I need to look after myself, and I need to perhaps go away from that, or somewhere where if there's a lot of sound. If I'm trying to, having a television on when someone's or a radio on when someone's having a conversation. Someone that tries to have a conversation, there's a radio on, there's a washing machine going, you're going to get overloaded with sound. So just learn what your triggers are.
Yeah.
So that's why I got really annoyed, because the washing machine was on, the radio was on, and you were talking to me. So I sounded really angry at you. so you shouted back at me. That's what happened. But that was the only reason that was the reason where it came from. So it's learning to navigate those. It's learning that, becoming aware of that any sensory stimulus can overload you, and being aware that actually that's taking away some of my capacity.
Yeah.
That's on in the background. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that that is there, and that's why when I go alone or I go out for a walk in nature, I get so much energy back. It's learning where you get your energy from, what's draining your energy, and having that self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So it is that journey into self-awareness. So I didn't realize for a long time that I was getting overloaded, and you can really be misjudged. You can really be thought to be, you can act in ways that sound like you're very domineering or you're very uncaring, when actually you're just trying to navigate the sensory overload that's happening.
Yeah. That is really, really helpful. We have another question. Is it from Pamela, why is it easier for men than women to be diagnosed with Asperger's?
Because the original samples were boys, of which the whole criteria was set up from. So right from Asperger and so on,
Mm-hmm.
it was just diet. It was just set up with these were boys, and so they used boys in the original sample in order to define what the characteristics were, but they didn't realize that in that there was a bias.
Yeah.
Were seeing were male characteristics, not
Mm-hmm.
just autistic characteristics, and they were confusing the male characteristics with the autistic characteristics. So it's something we're slowly getting out of, and also this idea that it's the male brain, that somehow autism is just maleness,
Mm-hmm.
is just some form of masculinity,
Mm-hmm.
whereas there isn't. It's because those characteristics have got confused because of the bias
On the
in
sample.
the sample of
Yeah.
first originated from.
I've got a question. Say, Dave, do you want to talk about spoons?
Spoons.
Yeah.
Where is that? Is that
In the Q&A?
In the Q&A one? Let's have a look.
Does it mean it?
Is it in the Q&A? In the Q&A, I've got. Oh yeah, I'm not moving forward.
If you go down.
Move down.
Oh, a capacity to cope. So I think, is it like I think I've known about like a spoon theory where you say I've only got a few spoons left.
That's Nets. What? That's Nets. Jeanette Derbyshire's my wife. Why are you saying you want to talk about spoons, capacity to cope? Yes, Demi. I can talk about capacity. So that's what we're saying about the levels of processing that it can take.
Yeah.
That as you are listening to something, it's taking some of your ability.
Yeah.
Like you have a certain amount. I think that's what she's meaning in the
certain amount of spoons. I've heard this before. It's like it's a way. I think it's a better way to, not a better way. I think it's another way people can communicate without having to they can just say like I've only got I've got one spoon left of the day. So no thank you.
Yeah.
That
I think of it in terms of like processing capacity in a computer. That if you've got programs running in the background, it's taking your processing capacity. So you've got too many things open in the background, your computer's really, really slow. And so that's what happens. We have so many things that there might be something we're thinking about here. We might be something we're listening to here. We might be something else happening. And that's why we can't multitask very easily. We find multitasking a challenge. Found driving. One of my regrets in life is that I didn't give up driving sooner.
Right.
Driving requires so many things to be processed at once. Of perceiving all that's happening with the traffic.
Sight, noise.
Speed on the signs, on where the other cars are, and then having and possibly having a conversation. And people can't understand why you drop out of a conversation and you don't want to talk to them because you're concentrating on driving.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's so stressful, and now having to park. I was terrible at parking.
yeah.
So a few years ago, I gave away my car, and it just happened to be at the time to give it away to my niece, and thought, oh, it's being a bit more environmentally friendly and whatever. But it was so less stressful.
Oh, that's good.
It's so
That's
less
good because you, yeah, like it wasn't helpful to you, but you,
stressful.
again, it's like thinking you have to conform, be like, oh, everyone's got to drive, and then you're like, just doesn't,
Nobody
just doesn't.
suggested to me,
Yeah,
and oh, you don't, yeah, you perhaps don't need that now.
yeah,
And you could get around on public transport, which
yeah,
yeah. I mean, I know things are slightly different now, but
yeah, yeah,
at that point, I'm really glad that I gave up my car, because of it was involving processing all those things and trying to navigate,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Trying to find somewhere to,
trying
yeah,
to have
like,
a
yeah, yeah,
conversation about something else, and finding somewhere to park all at the same time.
yeah,
So yeah, that's what, yeah, that it's like you're using up all this capacity, and that's why people have a meltdown, because the capacity is being used up. So they've got a very little bit of capacity to deal with it, and people assume you've got all this capacity like everybody else has,
yeah, yeah,
and all that's happening, and so they can't understand why you respond in the way that you respond, and totally misjudge why someone's acting in the way that they do, and realizing. And this is why this awareness of the sensory things is so important, that we were talking about before.
Oh, so honestly, I've written so many little notes just to look through later, because I've just learned. I felt like I've learned so much from you, David.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for bearing with me and my probably tangents and going off on weird things. But I think we've reached the end of our lovely time. I can't see any other questions. For the people that are watching, again, on the chat and on, I think, on the live stream on YouTube, there is links to the website, the Facebook page, the Twitter, everywhere that you can find David and their work. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to say anything else, David, if not, I just realised I put you on the spot. When you're just trying to trying to end with something clever, but I can't. So people stay safe. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, everyone. Bye.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Bye.